last song. I know most of you probably don't know it. It's called Awakening. How perfect, because the series we're starting tonight is called Awake. Did you pick up on that? That was intentional. We planned that. Did you guys know we did those things? Anyway, I love that song. It's so good. But we are starting this series tonight based on this book called Awake. Discover the Power of Your Story, Awake, the book you can watch. And this is a 4-week series that we're getting into, unpacking what it means to discover your story in light of God's story and what God's doing in the world and how we can live fully awake. And it's titled The Book You Can Watch because the author, Joel Clark, as he tells stories about his life, he also has videoed different components and videoed part of it. And so in this series, we'll be sharing verbally some of his stories as well as visually, so you can see kind of what's going on, which is really cool. It's a very different book than any that you've probably read before. And when we choose to live, this is kind of Joel's premise for the book. When we choose to live a story that is greater than us, we find God in the midst of it. When we choose to live a story that is greater or beyond who we are, we find God in the midst of it. So Joel is somebody who lives his life beyond the walls of the church, and he's living like Jesus and inviting other people to do the same. So it's really easy. We can go through life, let me go back, sleepwalking, and thinking that we're engaging life and engaging the world, and we can just go through life kind of sleepwalking and thinking if I'm coming to Christian activities and I'm doing things at church, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate into our spiritual lives and who we are at the core in our faith. And so hearing Joel's stories and adventures and hearing from us youth staff, I'm teaching tonight, and then Neil next week, and you'll hear from Adam, our new high school youth minister, the week after that, and then Austin and Olivia, Austin and Olivia, if you want to just give a little shout out, our interns for the school year. They are school year interns, so they'll be serving with us through the school year, and they'll teach on kind of their last Sunday night, which is really exciting to have them share in that way. And then you'll hear from other youth as well, and kind of stories where we've all been awakened to what God is doing in our lives, and hopefully gain a better picture of what it means to live life to the fullest, to live fully awake. We see that in the Gospel of John, in John 10:10, that Jesus said he came to give life for the full and give it to the fullest, so we can know what that looks like. And for me, I've often felt really awake when I'm serving. And we'll talk about different ways that you can feel fully awake, but tonight is a lot about action and doing things with action. And so kind of on a small scale, I can remember last semester going and serving at 61st Avenue tutoring on Wednesday afternoon. And I was out on the playground playing with people, and then came in and we sat down at a table, and I was helping three young girls with their homework, and I was pregnant at the time, and they were asking just like all kinds of questions and just really engaging with them. And I can remember at the end of that conversation, at the end of the time hanging out with them, they said, "Are you going to come back? Will you be back next week?" And I was kind of awakened in that moment, thinking about how the consistency that they need and that they might not have at home, and just connecting with them on that level. And it really kind of woke me up, and it was a really cool moment. And something maybe a little bit on a bigger scale, I can remember serving in Honduras on a mission trip, and this was with my last church I worked at before here, but serving in Honduras for a family, and we were building a house, and they lived in, has anybody ever heard the phrase a lean-to? Have you ever heard that before? Okay, that was an upgrade from what they had. They really hardly even had that. They just had like cardboard boxes and like tin pieces that were all kind of pieced together, kind of in a lean-to form. They didn't have they had cracks, holes, and all the different kind of walls, as it wasn't a sturdy structure. Long story short, this is the family we're building an actual house for. The dad, through the process of looking for a home and for help in that way, for that physical need, had started going to church and accepted Christ. The wife was still a little skeptical, and they had a little daughter. The end of the week, we were dedicating the house to them and praying over the family. And at one point, the dad wanted to pray, and he's praying in Spanish, and they spoke a little bit of English. And after he got done praying, the wife decided she wanted to pray. And she just dropped to her knees, hands lifted. The Spirit had just overcome her, and she was awakened. And it was the coolest moment. It was her little daughter had been running around kind of this whole time, not paying attention. And all of a sudden, she's looking up at her mom, just like watching her mom with the emotion that's overcome. And you can only imagine what was going on through her life. And I bet she'll never forget that moment. I'll never forget that moment. And that was something that awakened me. I didn't do anything grand in either situation. I wasn't doing anything impressive, but it was the Spirit of God that was moving, and I was just awakened to it. So it's being aware of God's presence and activity all around us, that God's always moving, but we're often asleep and can't recognize it. And the book starts off with Joel telling of a time when he was in Haiti, and he was just south of Port-au-Prince, in the capital of Haiti, and doing research for a documentary. And I normally don't read from something during teaching, but the story kind of speaks for itself. And so this is part one of a story, and this is literally how the book starts off, him telling this story. So I'm actually going to read this to y'all and just try and visualize what's going on here. It's really kind of impactful. I watched as they dragged a screaming woman into the dusty streets of Cité Soleil. And there's a map up there that you can hardly see. And you see Port-au-Prince, and that's the capital, and Cité Soleil is just kind of below that. And Jacmel is where some people in the room have been on mission trip before with Restore Haiti as well. I watched as they dragged a screaming woman into the dusty streets of Cité Soleil. Stopping directly outside her truck, a group of men threw her into the ground, savagely ripping the shirt from her body. One man jumped in with fists flailing. He was trying to drive away the others, but there were too many. He first took a fist to the face, immediately going to the ground. At least 10 men were involved in the fighting, but the crowd that had gathered to watch easily numbered more than 50, and it was growing by the second. My eyes were glued to the woman as she was the center of it all, being pulled back and forth like a rag doll. I'm holding way too many things. All right. Father Rick Frechette, whom I simply call the priest, was talking on his cell phone, not yet aware of the brutality happening just outside of Eyeshot. There we go. Only when a man shoved against the side of the truck did his attention shift. We were inside a medical truck, and the woman was being attacked just a few feet from my door. Unable to make myself move and unsure what I would do if I could, I sat and watched as the violence began to spread. Some of the spectators, men and women, were beginning to join in the fight. The woman was screaming, agony obvious in her eyes as one of the men brought his face close to hers, shouting angrily. Tears mixed with the dust to make muddy tracks down her cheeks. Wrestling an arm free, she slugged one of the assailants hard in the face. Shock shifted to rage as he grabbed hold of her arm once again and slammed his fist in the side of her head. Stunned, her legs momentarily gave way as she slumped between the men. My breath stopped as a knife flashed from somewhere deep inside the crowd. The fighting seemed to be spreading to a much larger group. At least twice as many men and women had now joined in the madness. Less than a minute earlier, only 10 men had been fighting. But now there were more than 30 men and women who were shoving and screaming at each other wildly. Yet it was this woman who was at the heart of the chaos. All the violence was centered on her. I didn't know what had caused it, but that didn't matter. Someone is going to die. Another man rushed forward, trying to free the woman, but he was shoved hard, stumbling back. He slammed against the side of the truck and fell to his knees. Transfixed on the scene in front of me, I didn't hear the door opening on the other side of the medical truck. I didn't even see the priest exiting the video. So this is literally how the book starts off. And so Joel, the author, is the one telling this story. And he mentions this priest. And we're going to watch a short little videos, one of the videos from this book, where the priest tells a little bit about his own experience in Haiti and his connection to Haiti. So watch this.
I just received a note just now from a volunteer who was here from Ireland a long time ago, and she was here for 7 years. And when she returned to Ireland, she returned with a severely disabled child who she adopted and who she dedicates her whole life to. And in her note, she says very simply, the best things in her life have come to her from Haiti. You know, so I mean, she has a huge richness to her life because of her time here. All the dynamics which are very raw here, where all of the fight for life and what is right are very, very important fights, and when you're involved in them and you're tired, it's a really good kind of tired, and you feel your life has a great importance. I don't think anything can replace that you feel actually important in the world, and that what you're doing today is extremely important in the world, and it fills you. And I think that seems to be missing a lot in the developed world. Sleeping to what life is really about, sound asleep and feeling empty. And then the emptiness is endless pursuit of activity, noise, images, sounds, drugs, gambling, and very sadly, suicide frequently, because it ranks as a leading cause of death among teenagers, and it's starting to rank as a leading cause of death among children older than 10. Why? Why is it? You know, so I think it has to do with that. When there aren't layers and layers of curtains that completely becloud and confuse what life is all about and what your role is in it, when you live in a very dramatic setting and you have to stand up to the plate, you have to. And when you stand up to the plate, all kinds of things are called out of you. Your talents, your abilities, your idea to calculate, your idea to reason, your idea to relate in a way that's going to bring a good ending to something that could be dangerous, your ability to commit and to stick with your commitment, those things make you feel alive. So I think it's that simple. It's probably too bad that it takes poverty and disaster to make you feel alive. It's probably too bad. But poverty and disaster aren't very far away from even the developed world, even though we put those things far, far, far from our conscience. So I just think it's just true living. That's all. It's just true living, and true living is inspiring. And true living is not so easy to do in the developed world. There's too many layers and layers and layers and layers of philosophies and images and subtle messages, sublime advertising that get in the way of it.
Dramatic ending to that video clip there. So Joel, the author, is in Haiti doing a documentary, and so we'll see a little bit more from his story in a little bit. And Father Rick, who was in his video in 2006, he was the only white man who was allowed to go into Cité Soleil, where they were headed in this story that I was just reading a little bit about. So he's this well-known man who stands up for the poor and the oppressed and provides them with dignity that they often would not experience otherwise. He has this deep connection with the Haitian people. And we hear from his story that he is somebody who simply does what the Bible commands, to love other people with action. And he talks about living life awake. And he serves the poorest of the poor. Shared a little bit about that and talked about true living. So I'm actually going to finish reading the part of the story in the book from that scene in Haiti where Joel's in the truck and Father Rick is the one driving, and it just said that Father Rick had stepped out of the truck. The woman was on her knees now, tears flowing freely as she struggled to rise. Her shirt was lying on the ground, trampled by the madness that raged around her. A thick sheen of dust filled the air, eerily framing the scene. Another woman who looked to be much older, with a leathery skin and deep wrinkles of someone who hadn't had an easy life, pushed through the crowd, trying desperately to reach the woman on the ground. Her arms were fully extended, but she couldn't get to her. Two men were holding her back as she screamed and pushed against them. They had their backs to me, so I couldn't tell if they were trying to keep the old woman safely away from the madness, or they were angry with her for interfering. The gathered crowd had changed to a mob more quickly than I could have imagined. Everywhere I looked, people were shoving and punching each other wildly. The madness was spilled over into the road as some of the mob began to fight in front of the medical vehicle. I was still frozen in my seat. As the woman rose unsteadily to her feet, I saw a knife rise in the air again, the sun reflecting on the blade like a mirror. The knife was different from the others I'd seen. The others had been shaken violently in order to threaten. This one was raised with intent to kill. That's when the miracle happened. I watched it unfold right in front of my eyes. Out of nowhere, another hand shot in the air, grabbing the hand with the knife and stopping it before it could plunge the knife into the heart of the woman. The mob quieted in an instant, like waves suddenly calmed. The man with the knife lowered his eyes with an embarrassed, almost apologetic look. That's when I saw him, the priest standing at the center of it all. He had walked into the heart of the mob and stopped a murder. He's not a tall man, but he definitely stood above the crowd that day. I watched as he took off his jacket and put it around her. He said a few things in a language I didn't understand, and then he led her over to the young men who had followed him out of the truck. These men were trying to look like his bodyguards, but ended up looking like mere boys standing next to this real-life hero. The priest must have instructed them to take the woman home because they all surrounded her and guided her away from the crowd. He then said a few more words to the people, putting his hands on their shoulders and calming them. A minute later, he was back inside the truck, putting the phone to his ear, continuing with the call he had been on before the whole incident erupted. He hadn't even hung up his cell phone when he stopped the murder. After the call was concluded, he simply concluded telling me the story he had been in the middle before he interrupted by the ringing phone. He made no mention of at all of what had just happened. And he's talking about the priest, the guy we just heard from in the video there. And so we're actually going to watch kind of another little, this is a shorter clip of the scene where this fight actually happened in Haiti.
All right, so not to ruin the story, I hate putting pictures in everyone's mind here, but when you, this is the place the woman was being attacked, right on the side of the road here. I prefer to have people imagine it, but we were driving by, Wish and I were driving by here a few years later, just after I'd written the book, and I decided to, he mentioned this is where it happened. So I thought I'd stop and give you a spot, the location. It was right here in the midst of this, right on the side of the road. Right here you'll see this is stuff from the earthquake, so some of this rubble wasn't here. But right over there you will see a lot of the bullet holes. All the way up and down this street there's bullet holes like this. So it's crazy. This is where it happened. Again, I prefer to, I'm not sure if I'm going to put this online or not, because I think the mind paints a better picture than the camera ever could. But this is it. This is where it happened. This is where the priest saved the woman, and I asked him about it recently, and he didn't even remember it happening. He's got so many insane stories. I don't even know what to think.
So many of us are often asleep and feeling empty, and we are sleeping to what life is really about. Not until we step out of our comfort zones will we realize what talents and abilities God might want to be using and working through us for His good. Have you ever thought about being more than who you are? Maybe being kinder, bolder, more passionate, more assertive, or more courageous like the priest in the story we've heard. And maybe you've thought about those things and even prayed about them, but sometimes when we're given opportunities to act, we're too afraid. We come back into the safety of dreaming, too afraid to live fully awake. As my good friend Neil Wilkinson pointed out, there's a Nicki Minaj song called Moment for Life, and she says, "To live doesn't mean you're alive." And later in the song, it features Drake, and he says, "'Cause everybody dies, but not everybody lives," which is very kind of pertinent along with this series. However, a much worthier piece of medium to be quoting is actually Braveheart. This second line comes from the movie Braveheart, if anyone didn't know, and you can see that in the bottom left-hand corner of the DVD, or it's probably more like VHS cover. Every man dies, not every man truly lives. So regardless of who this is coming from, the message is the same. We can walk through life sleepwalking and never actually being fully awake to what God has for us. And the Bible is full of stories of men and women who are living life asleep until God awakens them to a better story. In the Old Testament, we find Moses in the book of Exodus. He was a shepherd who'd been wandering the land for years. And God appears to Moses one day through a burning bush, through a burning bush, and says, "Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground." And it's not as if the ground just suddenly changed, suddenly became holy, or was illumined or something. It's not that it changed, but that Moses was awakened to God's presence. Are we possibly standing on holy ground all the time? Are we passing by burning bushes on the left and the right, but we're too stuck in our routine? Or we're too busy and we're too distracted to even notice them? And then in the New Testament, we encounter Saul, who persecuted Christians and then had this transformation with Jesus Christ, and his name was changed to Paul. Yeah, Saul's name was changed to Paul. You've heard about Paul and a lot of the letters that Paul wrote in the New Testament. But before that, Saul was one of the biggest persecutors of Christians, but he later became instrumental in leading so many people to Christ and building the foundation of the early Christian church. And sometimes we think about the Bible as like this two-part story. It's got the Old Testament and it's got that was a hard one, it's got the New Testament. You guys are great, yeah. So it's this two-part, and if we ascribe to the kind of this line of thinking that it's just the old and it's just the new, then no wonder so many of us sometimes get stuck in being asleep or feeling empty. So if we read the Bible like a textbook and only trying to get from it things of the historian studies the writings of ancient worlds and just look at it that way, then it's like this story that's already been told and it's in the past and the chapter's concluded and we're late to the party. And we end up feeling like we don't have any kind of role in this epic kind of two-part adventure of the Old and the New Testament. But maybe instead Scripture's like a trilogy. And if that's true, maybe we're all playing, we end up feeling like we're not part of it. If we think of it's more like a trilogy, then it's something we still have a role in. And then installment in the third act, a story that's still being told. And Toy Story, right? Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. Because a lot of times it's kind of the conclusion. That's the exciting part of the story is that third act. And maybe that's where we're at. And maybe we're living kind of in the middle of that. In the story, this two-part isn't quite done yet. Nathan, if you want to start making your way up here, that'd be awesome, wherever you are. Next week, Neil's going to talk a little bit more about this concept of story and what it means to kind of engage in our story and God's story. But as we start off this series tonight, I hope you have a better idea of what it means to not live life asleep, but rather how to live life awake and to do things with action. And like the priest in the story, when our lives are full of action, whether big or small, and he even mentioned that, he's somebody who's living life on a grand scale, we're much more likely to be awakened. And so I've asked Nathan just to come and share, if y'all want to welcome him. Nathan was on the mission trip last week in New Orleans, and so I just wanted him to share a little bit about his experience. If you want to say what grade you're in and what school you go to, Nathan.
I'm Nathan, and I'm in 7th grade, and I go to Woodland.
Awesome. And how do you feel like on the mission trip last week you were able to step out of your comfort zone?
Well, first of all, I've never been on a mission trip really, and so that was just something new for me. And I've also never been to anywhere where I worked on houses and did construction work and stuff.
Did you find those things to be kind of challenging since you hadn't been on a mission trip before?
Yeah, the construction work was really like physically challenging.
Yeah, awesome. And that's not something you probably weren't necessarily expecting. In what ways do you feel like you were loving other people with action while you were there?
Well, I think it was the last day that the lady that we were working on her house, and it had gotten destroyed in Hurricane Isaac, and she came in and she started crying because my dad and someone else were working on her front door, and she started crying, and we could all see like the love of God just like coming down and awakening.
Awesome. Any other ways that you'd say that you felt awakened on the trip? Like how did you kind of wake up and feel like you saw things with a new perspective?
Well, I felt awakened because when she came to the house, I felt like, I was like, wow, I'm not the only person in the world, and the world doesn't revolve around me. And I just realized that there's so much else to do, and that we should all go out there and help other people.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathan, for sharing. Appreciate it. All right, so each Sunday night as part of this series, we're going to kind of end with a different awake challenge. And this is in your small group, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. And you'll talk about kind of other opportunities if you can't get involved with these as well. But this week we're challenging you to just do something, do some type of action. And we naturally in our student ministry have 3 weekly service opportunities, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday after school that you're able to jump in at with any time. And then church-wide, if you've been here in worship service, you're maybe aware of this, that we're starting another Habitat build. And so the church is raising money to build a home for a family in need in Franklin. And so that's something they're able to jump in on as well. And then we challenge you to, through those experiences, you'll undoubtedly be awakened in some way, which is really, really awesome. If you want to grab a hand, we'll pray, and then we'll be dismissed to small groups.